Hi, this is Alvin Alexander, author of the Scala Cookbook, and this is a video version of recipe 20.5, reading data files into a Spark DataFrame. I could demonstrate this recipe at the command line with Spark, but to make things more interesting, I'm going to demonstrate it with the Databricks platform. And in this recipe, I show how to get started using a Spark DataFrame. So let's jump into the code. So the first thing I mentioned in the book is that the problem is that you want to read a CSV file into a data frame. So this is Databricks here. This is the Databricks platform. And the CSV file I had in the book is named Tom Hanks Movies with no header.csv. And the name came about because I had another file that had a header in it, but I don't believe that one made it into the book. So this one doesn't have a header, meaning that the first row, there's no header column there, or excuse me, there's no header row there. And the way we have to do this in Databricks is we actually have to upload that file to the Databricks platform. So I already have a cluster running here with this named December 2nd, which is when I'm making this recording. So now I want to upload my data file to the Databricks platform. And I'll just check that real quick to make sure we're all good. Everything's good. So it has uploaded, and then I'll just say done. Sometimes when you're using Databricks, if you're doing this for the first time, you may want to copy this. You'll see that path in just a moment. But since I've done this before, I don't need to make that copy. Okay, so now that we have that CSV file uploaded, the next thing we want to do is create a schema for it. And this is an optional step, as I'll show later, but I prefer to create a schema. And so what I do here, I'll scroll up here for just a moment, is I create a schema, val field name schema, and it has this struct type, and it consists of different struct fields. So I have a field named year, name, and rating. And those fields and those names correspond to the file here. So you have year, name, and rating, and that could have been title, but I called it name. And then again, rating here. And these data types correspond to the types that you see here. So year is an integer, the name is a string, and then the rating is stored as a double type in Spark. And the way you would run this in Databricks, there's two different ways. You can click here and then say run the cell, or you can use a shift and enter key, which is what I'm going to do. So I do that, and then you get a little bit of results here that basically just shows that you created a schema field with the struct type and the information above. And in the code here, I showed that there's a second way that you could have created the schema, but I'll just go with the first way. And then the next thing we can do, next thing we do in the recipe, is that we read that file in. So this is where that file path comes in. So again, I had this file named Tom Hanks Movies, no header, CSV. I uploaded it to the Databricks platform. And then on their platform, using the community edition, this is where the file is located. So the DBFS field here stands for Databricks file system. So this is where that CSV file is located. And then everything else here should be the same as it is in the book. So I use the Spark variable and say that I want to read something in, and it has a CSV format. And I want to use the schema that I defined here to read in that file. And then I'm saying this next, the option delimiter is not required in this case because it's a CSV file that's separated by commas. But if it was separated by tabs, then you'd want to replace this here. So that was the reason I left this in. And again, the load method is where I specify the name of the file to be read in. So again, I can hit shift and enter. And that will read in that file. And you won't see a whole lot of information there other than it read it in successfully. So then usually what I do is I'll run into a command like this one, like the print schema. So I call, and again, to backtrack, this created a field named DF, which stands for data frame. And you can see here DF is a data frame type. So I call print schema on the data frame variable, and you can see that it shows the same schema that I entered above. And then the next thing I do in the book, and this is actually very common, is to run something like a show command. So this says, show me two fields from the data set. And the reason you might want to do this is just to validate that you have read in the file and you're seeing the right data. Another method, which I don't remember if I included in the Scala Cookbook, is there's a sample method that you can use. that also samples the data. But since this only has a few rows in it, I didn't show that here. So now we have a good feeling that our data frame has some data in it, and now we can start working with it. So the way I do this in this recipe is I show that you use methods like this, like the select method, to kind of, it's a way of running SQL commands with a data frame. So this one here, I do a select call, and I specify the field names are year, name, rating. And I show in the book, I think in this recipe, or maybe in a previous recipe, there's several different ways to format this, but I think the most readable is when you have a column name, just to put a single quote in the front of it. And I think that makes for a very readable approach. So this one is saying, select these 3 columns from my data set in my data frame, limit it to 5 rows, and then show it. So when I press Shift and Enter, you see those results are refreshed. And if you're not familiar with it, methods like these, select and limit, are transformation methods, and they're lazy by default. So they don't run. And the only way you get them to run is to call an action method like show. So if I delete show here, and now I again do Shift and Enter, you'll see that the results are very different. It knows that basically nothing happens. I was going to try to explain that a little bit more, but basically nothing happens. Because select and limit are lazy, nothing happens. So if I do an undo and then say show again, show is an action method. So it kind of forces the results to be executed. And then I do say this output. This next query is not in the cookbook, but I looked at these results when I was working with it. I was like, oh, I should have ordered that rating column. So the way you do that is you slip in order by. And so here I say I want to order by the rating column in a descending order. So I'll refresh those results with Shift Enter. And now you can see that the results indeed are ordered by the by this rating column. And the next query is a where. So again, I'm showing things that are kind of like equivalent to SQL. So you have a select method, you have a limit method, you have an order by method. Now here's a where method. So I'm saying where the year is greater than 1998 and the rating is greater than 7.5. And we see these results. Oh, okay. So here I just do rating is greater than 7.5, and then I order by the rating. Again, descending. So you can do that. And I believe, but could be wrong. So you could take, I think if you take that descending off, it will do ascending by default. Could be wrong, but no, there we go. Okay, so there we go. So that showed again, select, order by, limit, where order by. And you can also do, this is a little bit more like a Scala collections method where you're running a filter command, except the syntax in here is again SQL-like. So I'm saying where the name column is like this expression, which basically means that the name column has a capital T in it. So again, you do the show at the end. So again, transformation method over here, action method forces the results to happen. And I believe I slipped this one in the cookbook as well. Let me double check that. I have the cookbook over here on the right. And I did put that in here. Okay. So when you're reading a CSV file, you can also specify the options as a map. So I do that here. So again, it's spark.read, and then I specify these options as a map. And I did one thing wrong in the cookbook. This is in the cookbook, this field is true, but it's actually false. There is no header row in the CSV file. So this should be false as it's shown here. And I create this as df1 since I already have one data frame named df. So this is df1. Do a Shift Enter, and it runs. And now I come down to this next cell and run df1.show. And you see, actually, you see quite a difference here, right? Because I don't use because I don't specify a schema, and because there isn't a header row in the file, you'll see that now the columns have these much less useful names of underscore C0, C1, and C2. So those names are a little bit less meaningful. And let's see, where am I here? Next thing, so I think in the cookbook, I may show how to write the results out. And the way you do this on Databricks, actually, I'm not sure if this is 100% right. And in fact, it's probably wrong. but it does work. So the way I write my data frame results out, so I got my data frame object here, and the way I write these results out is I say I want to use a header, and then I want to write to a CSV file, and having this name data frame results is a name that I specify. And it's actually not a file. I think it's mentioned in the book. This creates a directory. So if I scroll down a little bit here, then this cell shows how you run an ls command on the Databricks platform. So use this syntax. The %fs is saying that I want to run a file system command. So you run an ls command on this is what I specified, and then you see these results in a tabular format. And these first 3 rows aren't too important for what I'm doing. And then the 4th row, you can see that it's a CSV file and it has this long name. And so then what I do in this next cell here is again run a file system command. So this is a head command on that long CSV file name that was shown here. And then you can see that the results are stored in that file here. So that was a way, let me double check that. Yeah, so in the recipe, I show how to write a data frame to a file. So that's exactly what I do here, except on the, on the data frame, on the Databricks platform, that's a little bit different. And then finally, we get to, this is the end of the recipe. So this is kind of a transition into recipe 20.6 is what this is. So I run a command that is very similar. I think that's exactly the same as the way I started it, except I call this one df2. So I'm creating a new data frame named df2, reading in this file. So I need to do a shift and enter to execute that. And again, there's not any kind of significant result there. I could do a show on df2, but I'm pretty confident everything is working. And then how this leads the transition into recipe 20.6 is this next line. And when you call this method, create or replace a temp view with the name movies, in this case, I'll go ahead and run that. And this creates a temporary view. So it's kind of like using a lazy view in Scala, which is really cool. And the view has whatever name you give it. So I called it movies. And now the very cool thing is you can say select star from movies, which is the name I gave it, and then any other SQL that you want here. Then you pass that query into spark.sql and then run show. And again, shift enter and show that result. And now we can see the result here. So again, the cool part about that is there's nothing in this cell here, there's nothing at all related to the data frame. So what happened here was I created this view named movies, and then I used that here in the SQL query. So now from now on into recipe 20.6, you can start using SQL queries and then just pass your query into spark.sql. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Again, this is Alvin Alexander, the author of the Scala Cookbook, and this was a video version of recipe 20.5, reading data files into a Spark data frame.